You're listening to the Procuretech podcast, your weekly show for all that's cooking in the digital procurement space. Yes, we've got the hottest startups, thought leadership, and conversation from visionary industry experts, and definitely no stiff corporate content. I'm your host, James Meads, Procurement Pro, Digital Nomad, and Procuretech fanboy. And now, here's this week's show. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, indeed, wherever you may be in the world. Welcome to our very first Procuretech Hub. This is a new format that we're going to be doing as part of the Procuretech podcast, where every 5 or 6 weeks or so, I will be joined live online by an industry expert to have a good old chat and debate about something new or something very relevant that's happening in the digital procurement space. So on this very first one, I am joined by Nico back. Nico is founder and CEO of his own company, Digital Procurement Now, and also has quite a long and illustrious career in digital procurement in the corporate world as well. So Nico, I'll let you introduce yourself. Over to you, sir.
Hey, James. So thanks for having me. Very exciting to be on your first podcast. I've been with a big consumer goods company called Procter & Gamble for 24 years. I never thought I would last that long with the same company, but most of that was in procurement. And actually the last years was kind of leading digital procurement for Procter & Gamble, which was very exciting. And I learned a lot. And after that, I thought, well, let's hit it off on my own and see if I can help other companies and people with digital procurement transformations, because that's really what we are focusing on at Digital Procurement Now.
Fantastic. And I mean, you can tell us a little bit about what you did there as part of your transformation exercise, because that's going to be really relevant for the debate that we're going to have, because we're going to be talking about best of breed versus suites. And I think that background is really relevant to sort of really cement your position on. Obviously going to be arguing on the side of suites today, and I'm going to be giving the case for best of breed. So just talk to us a little bit about that, Nico, and then we can jump straight in.
Yeah. I mean, the discussion about best of breed versus integrated suites is a very interesting one, and I think a very interesting book recently came out from Eloise Epstein from Kearney, which I read, and actually I'm in constant conversation with her about that book, which I found very, very interesting. So I think it's probably a bit of both, right? I think it's very hard to cover every procurement process for every spend area within an integrated suite. But I think there's so much discussion about these best of breed solutions that I think it's also fair to spend a little bit more time on integrated suite, and why I believe that's actually where you need to start as you look into digital procurement. It's not the easiest place to start, because obviously you have to make pretty substantial changes to your ERP setup and integrations, etc. But it's my belief that this is kind of the hard right versus kind of buying some fancy best of breed solutions and creating data silos and so on. So obviously there is multiple ways to roam, but I think it's maybe good to talk a little bit about the path that we've been on and what's worked for us at P&G, and also what I'm working with clients at the moment in terms of what's there, what should be that digital procurement strategy, and where to look for technology solutions, which it's not easy, right? I mean, there's so many solutions out there. I think very few people understand them all. Yeah, I think a lot of people don't really know where to start. So I think that's really probably a good starting point for this conversation, James.
And I think you hit on a great point there, that a lot of people don't know where to start. Interestingly enough, and I can give maybe everyone a bit of a sort of sneak preview to an open secret, really. I'm building a website actually at the moment, which is what's taking up a lot of my time. I'm not personally building it. I've got someone doing it for me. I'm not a tech guy, but that will actually cover a lot of the sort of confusion for someone that's maybe new into into a head of procurement role around, where do you start? And especially in the mid-market, there are websites and content out there for people working in big enterprise level companies, Fortune 500, FTSE 100, DAX 30 companies. But if you're a head of procurement with a much smaller procurement team in terms of resource and capability, a lot of that content, I did a podcast episode on this a few weeks back, is not particularly relevant. And I think that is a real gap out there. And I mean, that will, once it's launched, I hope, cover off a lot of that, because it will enable people to do a sort of pre-RFI activity to really get down to the short list of, okay, which solutions do I need to speak to and see demos and do my due diligence on, which I do think is missing at the moment. So, I mean, my background, just if anyone has not come across me before and is looking at this maybe from your profile, Nico, I haven't done what you've done in the corporate world, but what really got me excited about digital procurement was really what drove me to leave the corporate world, which is I spent probably half of my day doing tasks which could either be eliminated, delegated, or automated. I spent a lot of my time as a pretty well-paid regional category manager doing essentially transactional, operational, and administrative tasks. And I'm certainly not the exception. That I would say that's within most more traditional industries, that's pretty much the norm, because in the last 2008-2009 recession, a lot of the admin assistants and junior buyers were their positions were scratched, and they left the organizations, and that left category managers to do things like chasing people to sign contracts or manually submit travel expenses and all the kind of things that are not an added value use of our time. So that's really what got me interested into it. And I saw that it was such a rapidly expanding marketplace, even more since COVID now. If you look at, especially on the best of breed side, the number of companies that started out in 2020 or as a result, or certainly expanded and grew and got more investment as a way to sort of take an opportunity from a crisis, the marketplace has mushroomed now compared to what it was, in 2019, when I first started looking at this and doing a bit of research and understanding who was out there other than, the obvious players that we're going to talk about in the suites that most people have heard of. So, yeah, I mean, let's start off then. What would you consider to be the main sort of suite providers? Because there is a bit of a grey line in terms of some solutions providers consider themselves best of breed. I mean, I've got 7 that I made a note of that I would consider to be the biggest enterprise level suites, but you've got a lot more experience in that part of the market, Nico. So maybe let's call them out. Who would you see as being in this group before we talk about which one's the best solution?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, James, you hit a fantastic point, which is, why is digital so exciting for procurement? It's because it changes the procurement function, right? The impact that procurement can have on the business being digital is 5 or 10 times the impact that procurement can have on the business without digital. And this is why I am so excited about it, right? Because I've been a procurement professional for more than 20 years. I've bought contract manufacturing, packaging, IT, services. And I was always, having kind of a lack of data to be able to do my category management to a level at which I wanted to do it, right? Which was all about creating a competitive edge for the company I was working for, right? So, and this is why, digital is so exciting for procurement. And this is why I think procurement professionals need to understand digital, because it's going to change our function dramatically. Okay. Now, to your point around kind of platforms or kind of source to pay suites, obviously there's many companies out there. But when I kind of started working on this in 2015, the big thing was supplier networks. Okay, so supplier networks is kind of, instead of working on one-on-one connections with your suppliers, it was basically leveraging a supplier network to connect with all of the suppliers that are subscribed to this network. Okay, and this network effect is amazing, because instead of having as a supplier, I have to do business with these 50 companies, and they all have their own supplier portal. I can now work with a couple of these major portals or major supplier networks, and that's going to dramatically simplify my life as a supplier to all of these multinationals and all of my clients. And actually, I mean, there's only two supplier networks. One is Ariba, that was bought by SAP in 2014. That's been around since 2001, right? So very long history. Came out of free markets, which was the first time we had auctions. So we had very exciting start. But I think after it was acquired by SAP, I personally think that the innovation started to lag behind kind of the other kind of big platform provider in this space, which is the Coupa platform, right? That was founded in 2006, and then since then has grown pretty rapidly, and I think provides a lot of offering across kind of sourcing, ordering, and payments, right? Bringing that all of those processes together in a single platform, and don't have multiple solutions that your suppliers have to work with, because that complexity is killing your supplier connectivity efforts, right? So I really think there's only two big supplier networks out there, and I think everybody that looks into this has to figure out what's the right platform for them.
So that's a really interesting first point, actually. Sorry to interrupt there, but so we've got, obviously they're the two market leaders on the suite side, but so are you saying then that the others, like I'm thinking Jagger, iValua, Zycus, maybe Medius and Workday included in there as well, do they not have that supplier portal that integrates with all of their with all of their other customers, or are you just saying that they just don't have the relevance because they've not achieved critical mass with the number of people using it?
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a mix, actually. I think a lot of them don't have the critical mass to begin with. So, of course, I mean, in the tech world, we've seen this before, that kind of the winner takes it all, right? I mean, if you're on Facebook, you're not going to play around with your kind of country-specific social media platform, right? I mean,
we could maybe have a competition how many ABBA quotes we can get into this.
So, I mean, in the Netherlands, we had the Hives platform that was kind of pretty hot for a number of years. Still, everybody moved to Facebook and Instagram. But anyway, right? So I think when it's a network game, I think there will be limited number of players out there. And I think quite a lot of the providers, they don't create a supplier network. So you can leverage their platform, but as a supplier, I mean, I have different processes and a different login for customer A versus customer B, right? So I can't manage my customers kind of together. I have different logins and different, even if I use like an iValua or some of the other platforms out there. So I don't think they really play the same game as Ariba and Coupa from a supplier network point of view. Yeah, they play, I think, very much the same game when it comes to like sourcing functionality and catalog functionality and those type of things. But I don't think they leverage themselves really as a supplier network like the other.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that is an important difference in terms of supplier collaboration, I guess, and just, I guess, resistance from suppliers to sign up for the service as well. So what do then, so I mean, you touched on it a little bit already, that suites typically offer source to pay or source to contract functionality. What do they typically then not cover? Because you would assume to varying extents they should be strong in aspects of the source to pay or source to contract process, and there will be people that will argue against that, maybe in terms of user experience, but in terms of features, at least, they should be pretty strong in that area. Where do suites then typically fall down in terms of what they don't cover? I mean, I think the obvious one that I'm thinking of, which is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, is sustainability and maybe risk management to some extent. But are there any other areas that you can think of that typically they don't cover?
Yeah. I mean, what is procurement all about, right? Procurement is around suppliers providing goods, services, innovation, etc., to a buyer. And at the buying side, you have people in procurement and you have the business, right? So the business using the services, procurement basically, putting the contracts in place, doing the sourcing exercises, etc. So at the high level, procurement has three personas to cater for, right? On one side, you have the suppliers. And often, at P&G, we had 60,000 suppliers, right? All over the world. Very complex to manage, right? We had 1,200 buyers and we had 55,000 people that are involved with suppliers in the buying process. So those three personas, having one platform in which these three personas collaborate and where all information is visible across these different personas is super powerful. And, no matter, you can look at whatever best of breed provider, but if you don't have these three personas working together, the scope of that best of breed solution is going to be limited, okay? Because you can't run the whole procurement process on it. And I think many people see the ERP system as an alternative to a platform, but ERP systems are not designed for procurement. They are designed for accounting, right? So there's no, there's no entry. Suppliers cannot see into your ERP, etc. So there's many limitations with ERPs. Now, to get to your point around where do suite suppliers fall short of kind of best of breed suppliers? I think there's many areas that are kind of category specific, or it can be industry specific. Look at things like conflict minerals, right? Big deal for the mining companies, battery companies, automotive companies, but most other companies don't care about it. Child labor is another one. Environmental scores like EcoVadis type of scores, etc. So
that's it.
You have to find ways to connect these solutions or this data into an environment where the category manager sees what they are buying, and they also see what the risk profile is of the suppliers he's buying from or she's buying from. And so you cannot have a integrated suite that is not open to connect with all these other providers. And you can well decide that for auctions you want to have this tool because logistics, that's where all your carriers are already adopting that tool. So you can have very specific use cases where you say, well, a best of breed provider is much better able to meet my needs than the suite supplier, right? But I think if you don't have a suite that is cloud-based and open to your suppliers, I still believe that's the best place. That's the place to start from. And it's not easy. It takes time. It costs quite some money and quite some effort. But that's, I think, the foundation that companies need to have to really kind of lift procurement from the kind of the transactional world and kind of just chasing, other people to really be strategic for their businesses and for their companies.
There is so much that I can dig into there, and there's I'm just trying to memorize then what you've just said, because there's so much I could break down there. Let's start then with the first one. So you mentioned that in some cases it does make sense to add on best of breed solutions, but fundamentally it's better to have a suite in place as a foundation. Do you think then that's kind of, SAP Ariba and Coupa have now their own app stores, and you've got best of breed solutions like Per Angusta is the obvious one that I'm thinking of, because they've been quite aggressive in getting integration with the suites. I know Tealbook, I think, has done it with Jagger. Is that an acknowledgement then by the suites that it is a one-size-fits-all product and it's never going to be able to do everything? Because, I think on the one hand, it's good that they're acknowledging that there are things that they can't do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's a little bit like this famous machine here, right? This famous machine can do a lot, but it doesn't write the best fitness apps, right? It doesn't write the best navigation apps, etc., etc. So what you do is you bring those applications into the same environment where data actually flows between those applications and kind of the engine on which the whole procurement process runs, which I think is your source to pay platform, right? So I think it's there's a very, I mean, you see, this had happened in the consumer world. I think Salesforce is very far there's loads of companies that write applications within Salesforce, right? I mean, for all kinds of, marketing industries, and Salesforce sells those applications within the platform to Salesforce customers. And this is the same way as SAP Ariba and Coupa are gonna basically bring those solutions to life for their customers, right? I mean, sourcing optimization is a good example. I mean, Ariba doesn't have that part of their native suite, and they then have a sourcing optimization provided with QVAR that you can buy as part of their offering, right? So you have something that's already integrated, and Coupa does exactly the same thing with many of those solutions. So I don't think it's like an admission that this is a one size fits all. It is the future. I mean, to me, it's like it creates the environment where you can actually have APIs with those solutions, and an ERP system like Oracle or SAP will never be able to do that the way that Ariba or Coupa are able to do that. I mean, they're kind of more modern architectures where APIs are kind of given versus something that needs to be custom developed for a customer, right? So yeah, this is the way I kind of see it based on my experience, right? I mean, my experience has been in consumer goods over many, many years, and I now have quite a few customers outside of consumer goods. So you learn a lot about how they set up their P2P systems or source-to-pay systems. But I've not come across anyone that is better off with a collection of best of breeds than a suite.
And I'm not disagreeing with you, but I do think it's highly dependent on company size to a certain extent, because at what point, I mean, let's take whether or not the suites would talk to customers directly based on how big they are to one side, because I know their sales teams typically won't get out of bed and talk to anyone directly below a certain turnover. But at what point then would you say, because if we're comparing Procter & Gamble as a Fortune 500 company that does billions of dollars or euro worth of turnover a year, if you compare that to a mid-market business that's maybe got a procurement team of sort of 10 to 20 people, you're comparing night and day, aren't you? So I mean, I do follow your argument, and I do agree with you up to a point, but where I guess I would quite strongly disagree would be if you had a mid-market business that's doing a few €100 or a few $100 million or euro annual turnover. Yeah. I would argue that it probably or definitely doesn't make sense to go out and buy a suite just based on A, the cost, B, the functionality, and C, the amount of time that it takes to plan, implement, and leverage the benefits from it. Whereas in a big monolith like P&G, or indeed, I used to work for a direct competitor of P&G at Kimberly-Clark. They do have the resources and the external consulting budget to go out and do something like that. So where would you say the cutoff point is?
Yeah. No, that's a very good question, right? Because now I am involved into mid-market. So actually, I work with a company in the Netherlands, Dinatos, who actually is a reseller of Coupa, and they go into mid-market, right? So they go into the market where Coupa doesn't go themselves, and the question is, at what point does it make sense to invest in an integrated source-to-pay suite? So I've seen companies with an indirect spend of maybe $50 to $100 million, taking advantage of a source-to-pay suite. I have seen that, I mean, you can say, well, and I mean, if you can basically optimize your spending over like $50 or $100 million, because now you have visibility, you have control over that spend before actually the invoice comes in from the supplier, I think the investment pays back pretty fast, right? I mean, let's say you save 2% of your spend on $100 million a year. Yeah, then I mean that pays for the investment for setting up a digital source-to-pay platform. So I'm learning about this part of the market. James, because it's not an area that I've been active in. But I see quite some customers that or companies that actually taking advantage of these suites without having kind of the size that people maybe thought was needed to justify the investment and the efforts. And the alternative is they run it on their ERP system, which is also expensive. I mean, running on ERP is not cheap. And if you have to then upgrade it to, let's say, the latest and greatest release from Oracle or SAP, you're going to spend, again, a lot of money on it. It's still not cloud-based. It's still not built for procurement. And it's still not going to be user-friendly. So, I mean, I don't really know what the cutoff point is at the low end, but it's probably, I mean, it's lower than I had anticipated, for sure. Yeah.
Certainly, Cooper, I knew that they were going into the mid-market. I think SAP Ariba less so, but I'm surprised that they're going that low. I thought they might be going in at about 500 million, if we're talking dollars, euro, maybe pounds too. But I'm surprised that they're going in that low. And I think just a couple of points that I would make, or perhaps counter arguments, that I would agree with you that yes, there will be a payback, and if it's a choice of managing procurement from your ERP system or implementing a suite, then yeah, I would agree with you. I think my counter argument would be, if you're currently managing your procurement out of an ERP and you're looking to digitize, if you're a, let's just say, $100 million euro business, why would you buy Cooper versus when you can implement best of breed and implement it faster for a fraction of the cost? Mm-hmm. You don't have to plan it for months and years. It's a bit of a cliche, and yes, I don't believe that you can digitalize in it within a day, like some of these best of breeds claim. But certainly, you can do it in weeks rather than months or years. And I think that would be my argument, that those companies, unless their CEO plays golf with someone from a large consultancy, they don't have a massive IT consultancy budget to go out and implement one of these major 6 or 7 suites that are out there on the market. So yeah, I fully agree. I would rather have Cooper than manage it through my ERP, or I'd rather have Ariba than manage it through native SAP. But I would, if I was the CPO of a $100 million euro company, I personally would go down a route of having a best of breed procure to pay, a best of pay e-sourcing platform, and possibly, depending on what I was buying, perhaps a best of breed contract lifecycle management tool as well, or risk management if I was, like you say, buying commodities from a geopolitically unstable area, or if I was if I was a fashion retailer and I was buying textiles from developing countries. But that I guess would be my counter argument, because with the greatest respect, when you were doing this at P&G, the world has changed a lot since then, right? And now the software is becoming obsolete within 2 to 3 years. You don't have that long life cycle. If you look at the automotive industry, in the past, going back 30, 40 years, models used to change every maybe 8 to 10 years, whereas now they're having sort of midlife model cycles every 3 to 4. And I think on a more micro scale, that's the same with procurement tech to a large extent.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I think you touch a very good point, right? In the end, it's all about innovation, right? And there's a big question out there: Are bigger companies able to innovate at the same pace as smaller companies can, right? Startups can. And I mean, I know at Procter & Gamble we sometimes struggled with competition that was more agile and faster than we were, right? Or maybe catering to more local needs, or understanding consumer niches better than we did, right? So you always have this, right? And I think this is very healthy. I mean, I think these best of breeds providers are better companies because the best of breeds are moving so fast and are well funded by venture capital, et cetera, right? So they have to step up their innovation game because of that competition, which is a great thing. I mean, your point around buying multiple solutions and then tying them together. Yes, I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily cheaper or necessarily less work, because you talk about the companies that have like maybe not a big IT department. But I think if you don't have a big IT department, I think it's actually an argument to not buy 5 different solutions and try to tie them together, but actually to find find a simple suite and maybe do only a couple of things in the suite, right? I mean, you don't have to do contract lifecycle management in the suite. I mean, Word is really a good program to do signing of contracts, for example, right? I mean,
no, it's not. It's terrible. I hate Microsoft products with a passion, but that's another story.
Yeah. No, I mean, everybody has their. I mean, it's you can't talk to try to convince a Android user to switch to Apple or vice versa, right? I mean, people have their ways, have their ways of doing things. But your point around the innovation and best of breeds innovating fast with some great solutions, and I mean, you just look at the Future 5 from Spend Matters, for example, right? I mean, companies like Archlet or Pactum. I mean, very exciting kind of progress in terms of, and it basically gives the suite providers a run for their money, right? They have to step up their game to stay ahead or be ahead on each of the elements that they cover, right? Because, I mean, people may be looking at only a part. I mean, they might only be interested in, let's say, contract lifecycle management or supply risk management, and obviously then a best of breed. I mean, the suite supplier is up to another company that does nothing else but supply risk or contract lifecycle management, right? And of course, then it's a tough comparison because of all the other things that the suite provider is trying to do.
Isn't one of the whole sort of selling points, though, of the best of breed that, and it's in their interests as well, right, that they want to be able to connect easily with each other? Yeah. That's one of their selling points, isn't it? That the APIs are much simpler to connect with one another than they are necessarily to integrate with either an ERP or with one of the big suites. Because unless you're in Ariba or Coupa's App Store, it's not as easy to connect to that as it is for best of breeds to connect with one another, because they're all, to use a cricket analogy or baseball analogy, they're batting for the same team, whereas the suites are kind of in direct competition with the best of breeds as an end solution. So, yeah, I mean, I do take your point that smaller businesses may not have the IT resources, but at the same time, best of breed solution. Okay, if you're trying to make 10 of the things speak to each other, you're going to have a problem. But if you're trying to make 2, 3, 4 maybe speak to one another, I think most businesses would be able to run with 2 or 3 best of breed solutions to cover the core of what they're doing. That, when I speak to people within the industry, again, I'm not an IT person, I've never done it, but from people within the industry that represent these companies and that also are on the technical side, that I know that are in, software developers that are in other industries, they say that for any sort of SaaS product now, APIs are very, very flexible and are pretty easy to integrate with one another, as long as there is customer support and not some sort of useless ticketing system in some far-flung country to be able to support IT professionals when they're trying to knit all of these solutions together. Yeah. And in fairness, most of these procurement tech companies, they do have a very strong tech team, and they don't outsource that to a third party because they know that is paramount to an end user, to an end customer's success, to be able to integrate it with other solutions. The very nature that they're best of breed means that they can't do everything, and they focus on doing 1 or 2 things best in class.
Yeah. And the suite suppliers come with 3 major releases a year, and then kind of intermediate releases, bug fixes, etc. So if you have an API into one of those suite suppliers as a best of breed provider, you basically have to make sure that the solution works when these different products get upgraded, right? I mean, they both get upgraded on very fast cycles, and that integration has to continue to work, right? So, I mean, and there's a lot at stake. I mean, if you are a customer, and I think in P&G we integrated, 5 best of breed suppliers into the Coupa platform, right? Let's say a tax engine, for example, or a PO specific solution, a purchase order. for like consumer research or for capital, right? So where the POs were made as part of the capital project, the construction project, and it was done outside of the suite, right? So you see that, I mean, and those APIs have worked well, and I think probably P&G is probably more closer to 10 integrations, and also data providers, right? Dun & Bradstreet data, EcoVadis data, diversity data. I mean, really to manage your categories within that suite being kind of augmented. You have your spend data, you have your contracts, you have your catalogs, etc. But you also have your risk data on suppliers. Whatever risk area you care about, if it's conflict minerals or cybersecurity or child labor or whatever it is, right? Risk methods data on supply chains, for example. All that stuff can be integrated, and then the view would become incredibly interesting for procurement, right? Because now you have like a procurement cockpit. So all the data, this is always the big challenge for procurement, is we have far more data that we can handle to drive the sourcing decisions, right? And if you're not able to bring that data together in a structured way that makes sense for your category, you only use a small percentage of the data that's available. And I think this is what digital procurement allows procurement. It's all around increasing the impact of procurement to the business. I mean, to me, that's why I have so much passion for this topic. And I think, James, I hear the same thing from you, right? I mean,
likewise, 100%. Yeah,
the transactional stuff is going to be automated away. It's automated away for the most part. But that foundation then creates an ability for procurement to drive like a sustainability agenda, diversity agenda, and whatever agenda makes sense for your business. And I think that's really cool, because I mean it's not about cost savings. Procurement is not about cost savings at all, right? It's about bringing the business to a different level.
It's about value, which is what frustrates me, because I think we talk all the time and it's kind of a different topic, but we talk all the time about procurement being value drivers. And I truly believe that we are, with all of the stuff that goes under the radar. The cost avoidance is a massive one. I probably spent in all projects that I was working on, or supplier issues that I was working on, probably 2/3 of them were trying to avoid or negotiate away some sort of price increase or some sort of commercial dispute, which is not a P&L saving. But until finance starts acknowledging that, I think we're still going to be going around in circles having that same conversation. I think procurement practitioners get it, and I think most of our stakeholders get it. But as long as we're set objectives that are primarily based around hard P&L visible cost savings, then we're always going to be pushing jelly uphill, trying to convince people that we're not just cost reduction experts. But it's kind of a different. Maybe we can do another one on this, Nico.
No, I mean, and I think especially on indirect spend, it's all about what you buy. Are you going to buy this or are you going to buy that? And I think together with the business and developing the options and kind of the guarantees and the conditions, etc., is really, really cool, right? So that's why I think the impact that procurement can have on indirect spend, let's say IT spend, for example, is actually far bigger than the impact we can have on direct spend, which has been kind of, I mean, the price levels of the suppliers are pretty close together, and what they're offering is pretty close together.
Yeah.
Well, if you look
and
at
there's so
IT,
much suppressed economics in it as well, right? Because especially in somewhere like automotive, people have been hammering prices down on the procurement side to death now for the last 20 years. So suppliers just find more creative ways to make money, don't they? It's and anyone can see that.
Yeah. So that's why I think that buying indirect is really exciting, actually, and that's, I think, where these platforms also deliver the biggest value, right? Because I mean, on direct side, your suite is still going to be your manufacturing ERP, right? I mean, that's where you're going to hold your inventory, etc. And I think that's also interesting to see how that part can be better connected with the supply base, which is a whole different topic, which is, I think, harder to solve. I mean, P&G was also responsible for supplier connectivity, and that's not easy on those big chemical suppliers, etc. And it's not easy to connect your ERP with the ERP of of the supplier.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think the biggest opportunity for digitalization within procurement is going to be on the indirect side. But talking best of breed, there are some interesting tools out there that do things like cost and price estimation. One of them, Dutch guys, Dynamics, what's the price? They're one solution, and also around things like planning. I think Genlots, they're based in Switzerland, are doing something around production planning, and that's also a big area on direct materials. So I do think there's some exciting innovation in that space, but you're right, it's the opportunity predominantly is on the indirect side, and especially around services procurement. I think that's an area that digitalization historically has not touched so much, but now with some of the tools that are out there and coming on board, there's a big proliferation, can't say that word, around that area, which I think will continue to grow with things like IT and marketing spend coming more into focus as areas that procurement are starting to put their arms around and bring under their management. I'm just conscious of the time, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you before we signed off was around going back to this whole best of breed versus suite debate, particularly around consolidations and acquisitions in future, both on the suite side and on the best of breed side. Where do you see this going? And I'll refine my question a little bit in terms of what I mean here. So my personal view is that there probably isn't room for 7 providers of suites out there going forward into the future, even though, there's a big market to go after that hasn't started their digitalization. So will there be consolidation there, do you think? And the second part of that question is, as you alluded to earlier, there are a lot of best of breed solutions that are getting good funding from VCs at the moment. And that at some point, the music has to stop, because they're not going to fund these companies forever. At some point, they either have to be profitable or they have to show a growth strategy that is sustainable. And while some of them are growing very quickly and adding customers just as fast as they're adding employees, some of them seem to be going on a hiring spree, but you're not seeing their customer space expand so quickly. And at some point, when they come to get the next round of funding, the VCs are going to turn around and say, we're not going to give you any more money. So do you think the big suites will start to acquire them, or do you think some of the more successful best of breed solutions that are growing very, very quickly will sort of take that space and expand into being sort of mini suites? I mean, we're already seeing it with, I can have 2 examples that I interviewed recently. Venderful and ScanMarket would probably fit into that space. So is that an area that you think is going to expand, or do you think the suites will gobble up all of these companies when they fail to get the next round of venture money?
Yeah. Well, you see both Coupa and also Workday making big acquisitions, right?
Yeah.
What is it in supply chain, in contract labor, contingent workforce, right? Or sourcing. So you see big acquisitions.
That's Vendly, isn't it? That was acquired,
right? So that's,
by Workday.
$2.5 billion acquisitions by Workday and a $1.2 billion acquisition by Coupa in the last 18 months or something, right? So those are,
Lamasoft by Coupa, yeah.
Lamasoft, right? So those are big deals, and I think this is why venture capital is interested to back some of these startups, right? Because they see like a nice exit strategy by some of these, big software companies to acquire those, the best of breeds providers, right? And so you will continue to see that, and I think more of that is coming. And I think a lot of people don't realize how many acquisitions these tech companies make, right? Like a Google or a Twitter or a Facebook, they've made hundreds of acquisitions, right? And most of them
are it's just the big ones you hear of, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, and some big ones like Facebook acquiring WhatsApp or Instagram. Those hit the radar screen, but there's thousands of acquisitions that nobody ever sees, and this is how the tech companies and Salesforce does the same, right? Salesforce has bought Tableau, $25 billion acquisition. So those are not small ones, right? So there's a lot of money going around in the tech world, and that's funding, and that's fueling the funding of the best of breed providers, right? So, and I think also there will be best of breed providers that want to kind of expand from maybe contract management to source to contract, right? And to me, source to contract is kind of an area where you say, well, I have a suite for source to contract, and I maybe have my P2P still in ERP. I'm not saying that's what I would do, but maybe some companies decide that's all they can eat, or that's all they can do for the moment, right? So there will be collaborations between different providers in the source to contract area. Let's say a spend analytics company working with a e-sourcing company, working with a let's say Parangusta or sourcing optimization, and bringing those like 3 or 4 of those solutions together with APIs, and then going to the market together as well as a source to contract provider versus a spend analytics provider or an e-sourcing provider. So you will see some of those things happening as well, I think.
Do you not think that there will be acquisitions, though, from maybe some of the better funded, best of breed solutions? I'm thinking maybe like a Fair Market or a Scout B or a Tealbook that's been on a big growth strategy and is well funded. Because I guess then the question is, do they spend that money on hiring employees and expanding their products, or do they just acquire someone and then integrate that into it?
I think they will continue to do both. And acquisitions is not easy. I've done I've been involved in quite some acquisitions in Procter & Gamble, Wella, Gillette, Colgate, businesses, etc. And it's not easy to get it right. And I think because you have 2 cultures and so, but I think tech companies in general are quite good at identifying and then integrating the right companies to grow faster than they can without that strategy, right? So it's but it's not for everyone, right? Some companies will never acquire all the businesses because they think the risk is just too high. The risk of that strategy is just too high.
Because of the whole, as you mentioned, the whole cultural challenge of integrating 2 different companies into one rather than just hiring and building a solution yourself.
Yeah. And sometimes I think, it's really difficult to do acquisitions, and I've seen it closely, and it's very interesting work, but it's not easy work.
What do you think about the suites? Do you think all of them will still exist in sort of 3 to 5 years' time? And I think we would both agree that SAP Ariba and Coupa will still be there, and they're both too big to fail unless SAP decides to go in a different market direction as part of a bigger enterprise. But what about the others? Do you think they will all, without naming names, will they all be there in sort of 3 years, 5 years' time?
I think some of them are already struggling, actually. Even in a market where that's growing fast, right? Procuretech is growing very, very fast. But they struggle to innovate. And I think the space between like startups that are really innovative and then suites that have critical mass and massive supply networks, I think the space in between those 2 is getting smaller, right? I think it's kind of hard to kind of be like a semi-suite or something of a suite, but don't have the scale that the real suites have or the real supply networks have, and still you're also not innovating at the pace that, let's say, a Scout RFP or Fair Market or some of the others are innovating at, right? So if you're caught between that, I think you can get into trouble, right? And not every tech company is going to survive for sure, right? There's going to be a lot more that actually won't make it than companies that do make it, right? But the funny thing is, we only see the companies that do make it, right? So we think that's the reality, and there's many examples of companies that don't make it, and that's also kind of. That's life, right? This is how it works.
Yeah, indeed. And I think will my current database of sort of circa 300 Procuretech companies that I currently have, will that be bigger or smaller in 1 or 2 years' time? It's a really interesting question. You could argue it both ways because of new entrants, but then also inevitably, some of them will will fail or get acquired or will not get their next round of funding. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So super dynamic space and very, very exciting. So it's great to work in this space.
So, final question, Nico. If anyone wants to reach out to you before we sign off, what's the best place that people can get hold of you? Is it on LinkedIn, or is there another place that I should send everyone?
Yeah. Well, I mean, LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. So Nico Beck on LinkedIn. The business is called Digital Procurement Now. So actually, we have also a LinkedIn website of Digital Procurement Now and a website. So yes, please reach out. I think we very much specialized in digital procurement strategy, and I think what makes us unique is that we are all practitioners, right? We are procurement practitioners, and we've done procurement for decades, so we know procurement very well, and we've learned the technology side to be able to help clients with digital procurement strategy. And I think another one is that we really like to keep things simple, right? So you have a lot of companies out there that advise on digital procurement, and they come with very complex, charts and fancy slides, etc. And they forget the essence, which is, people, and make it simple for people. And if you do that and make every person win in this, I mean, when you do that, you will have a massively successful digital procurement transformation. And I think if you listen to a lot of the consultants out there, I mean, they like to sell days, hours, as much as possible, and they don't come with simple solutions because it's against their interest. And it's really unfortunate, right? I mean, and this is probably also one of the reasons we decided to start the business, Digital Procurement Now, which is focused on the success of the customer, and is focused on the people at the customer's side, right? I mean, it's in the end, it's people, process, technology, but people are first, right? I mean, that's the capital P. Procurement, I mean, a lot of the procurement processes are not really designed for people, right? They're designed for compliance or control.
And I think internal auditors and lawyers having to justify that they stay. Yeah, don't get me started on this one. It's interesting, actually. That's a good segue actually into the next one of these that I will be doing, which is going to be in January. I think it's the 26th, but I'll have to double check. That will be with Professor Florian Kleemann, who is a university professor and lecturer based in Munich, and his specialism, or what he talks about a lot, is the whole people and personnel factor in making digital transformation a success in terms of people culture and an openness to change, and how do you bring people on the journey. So we won't touch on that anymore, but that will be a really interesting discussion. And likewise, Nico, I'm a huge fan of simplicity as well, and I talk about this pragmatism over process every time, and agility. And I would much rather have something that doesn't have as many features, but more people will use internally, because then ultimately you get more spend under management, don't you? And you get better data. So absolutely 100% on the same wavelength there, even though we may disagree a little bit about suites versus best of breed. It's been a pleasure. Great to catch up. We must have a beer again sometime if we can still travel whenever we get to chat next time. Thank you for joining me on this very first Procuretech Pub, which for anyone listening to the podcast was originally broadcast on LinkedIn Live, which is, check out the Procuretech podcast page on LinkedIn if you're listening to this in the podcast, and catch the next one that we do as a live video stream if you'd like to see what we look like. Thanks again, Nico. All the best. Take care. And speak to you soon.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, really like doing this. Thank you, James.